across North America are in different parts of the program. So for those of you who this is pretty much the beginning, we welcome you. And for those of you who have been learning with us for several hours, we hope that you've enjoyed the learning and are ready to enjoy hearing from Anita Diamant and Mariah Ben Joseph. So I would like to introduce our interviewer. Mariah Ben Joseph is the administrative assistant for strengthening congregations at the Union for Reform Judaism. In her role, Mariah works predominantly with the Leadership Institute and with the Lay Resources team. Mariah joined the URJ in 2014 as the North American Camping Administrator and is an alum of URJ's Crane Lake Camp. She also took advantage of HUC-JAR's Miller High School Studies honors program. She was part of NIFTY NAR and attended the BIMA at Brandeis Residential Jewish Arts Program. Mariah has a religious studies major and women and gender studies minor from Muhlenberg College. Mariah is engaged to be married in June, and we're all excited for her. Her fiance is a PhD candidate in mathematics at the University of Delaware. And Mariah wants to share that she has wanted to work for the URJ since she was 8 years old, and we are thrilled to make her dream come true. Anita Diamant was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1951, and she grew up in Newark, New Jersey until she was 12, and then she moved to Denver, Colorado. She graduated from Washington University in St. Louis with a degree, in comparative literature and earned a master's in American literature from Binghamton University in upstate New York. In 1975, she moved to Boston and began a career in journalism, writing for local magazines and newspapers, including the Boston Phoenix, the Boston Globe, and Boston Magazine. She branched out into regional and national media, New England Monthly, Yankee, Self, Parenting, Parents, McCall's, and Ms. Anita Diamant also wrote about contemporary Jewish practice for Reform Judaism magazine, Hadassah magazine, and JewishFamily.com. Her first book, which was published in 1985, was The New Jewish Wedding, a handbook that combined a contemporary sensibility, respect for tradition, and a welcoming prose style. 5 other guidebooks to Jewish life and Lifecycle events followed: The New Jewish Baby Book, Living a Jewish Life, Jewish Traditions, Customs and Values for Today's Family, Choosing a Jewish Life, a handbook for people converting to Judaism and for their families and friends, Saying Kaddish, How to Comfort the Dying, Bury the Dead, and Mourn as a Jew, and How to Raise a Jewish Child. In 1997, Anita Diamant published her first work of fiction inspired by a few lines from Genesis. The Red Tent tells the story of an obscure and overlooked character named Dinah, the only daughter of Jacob and Leah. She has a number of other novels, including Good Harbor, The Last Days of Dogtown, Day After Night, and The Boston Girl. Anita's first book is now her most recent book. The Jewish Wedding Now is a complete revision and rethink of The New Jewish Wedding. And we are thrilled to have her here. One other piece of information which I think is really exciting is also that she was the founding president of Mayim Chaim Living Waters Community Mikveh, an education center here in Newton, Massachusetts, a reinvention of the ancient Jewish tradition of mikveh ritual immersion in water. So I'm going to turn it over to Mariah and Anita. Thank you both.
Anita, first of all, thank you so much for being here with us today. We really appreciate you being part of our inaugural day of learning.
My pleasure, entirely.
We'd like to start in the very beginning. In 1985, you wrote a book titled The New Jewish Wedding. What inspired you to write the book?
When I was engaged to be married, and I asked my rabbi what I should read. And my rabbi said, you should write a book on Jewish weddings because the books are terrible. This is Rabbi Larry Kushner. For those of you who know Rabbi Kushner, you know that tone of voice. And the thing is, I looked at the books, and they were not helpful. They didn't address me as a Jewish feminist, or certainly didn't address the needs of my fiancé, who was in the process of converting to Judaism. So it didn't talk about our families or situations. And it also didn't, and some of the other books didn't mention, so the books were either written by Orthodox rabbis or by etiquette ladies. And the etiquette ladies didn't mention yichud, which is this beautiful custom of being separated from the crowd after your ceremony. They focused on matchbooks. Remember matchbooks? And the Orthodox rabbis, or traditionalists, again, were not respectful of, I thought, contemporary life and values. So I saw there was a room on the bookshelf there for that. And I was looking for a book idea. So the year after I got married, I wrote The New Jewish Wedding.
So you updated the book first in 2001 and then again this year. What changes did you see in the Jewish community that led you to make those updates?
Well, the 2001 update is not as deep a revision as this one, and the internet happened. Somebody mentioned the internet, and it wasn't there in 1985, and things had changed a lot. There was no more Action for Soviet Jewry, for example, and I think the reform movement and the conservative movement and the Reconstructionist movement had all changed their names and their addresses, and they had a website and all of that, so that all went in there. Another change, another shift that happened, which it really follows through in all three books. When the first book was my first book, and I talked to the editor, and I asked him if I should mention same-sex couples, and he said, no, don't, probably not. And I said, okay, first book. Second book, I didn't ask anybody, and there's mention of same-sex marriages and couples, and there's a little bit about ritual, but it was also full of caveats about in some places you can't, in some places you can, it's not recognized by rabbinic authority, and on and on. Of course, now in 2017, marriage equality, and the landscape is just so completely different. So those were changes in the second edition, and this one, as we were introduced, has much more profound changes throughout.
So if this is such a significant update, why did you choose to keep the original material and update it rather than just start from scratch?
Because some of the original material holds. I mean, the descriptions of old customs and ancient tradition, the rabbinic sources, the Talmudic sources haven't changed, but what's changed is the contemporary landscape in which we find ourselves and the way we approach those materials. So I also hope I'm a better writer. I hope my most recent book is the best book that I've written, so there's that. But also, so much has changed. And we can talk about all of that, but I interviewed, in the process of writing these books, I've always interviewed rabbis, and I always look for cutting edge rabbis, and in this case, I would only talk to people under the age of, I think, 40, which to me sounds young, but they were even younger than that, because I wanted people who were doing a lot of weddings, and that tends to be who's doing a lot of weddings. And they had very interesting things to say that really shifted the way I wanted to frame the book.
So do you feel that there is a different audience for the original book and the newest version? What similarities might you see between those audiences, and what might be some differences?
Well, it's the same audience. It's people. You only buy this book if you're getting married or someone you know is getting married. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a particular niche. So it's that same group of people. The first edition, second edition, and the third edition all are written in language, I hope, that is transparent for people who are not Jewish or have no Jewish education. I just assume that the readers are interested and smart, and that's why they picked this book up. So I think it's important to respect the reader. And if you're picking this book up for any reason, I want you to be able to feel that it's accessible to you. So that hasn't changed. I think, again, the diversity of people has changed, but it's still being given to the parents of the couple, as well as whether they're Jewish or not Jewish parents of the couple. And every marriage is an intermarriage, no matter what. One Jewish family is and another, even if you're from the same Reform congregation, you do things differently in your household. So much more so if you're marrying I've gotten a lot of interesting emails from when one of the members of the couple is Reform and one is Orthodox. And this becomes a meeting place for them to have a conversation. So,
My fiance grew up conservative and I grew up Reform, and so we're navigating those cultural differences as we plan our wedding.
and I'm hoping the book is helping you do that, right?
For sure.
Okay. a little ad. Okay.
You've published books, as Lisa mentioned, on other nonfiction topics like raising a Jewish child, living a Jewish life, Jewish mourning practices, and you're in the process of updating some of these other books as well. Can you tell me what changes did you see there that led you to update those?
Well, the Choosing a Jewish Life was updated last year, and and again, I think the community has changed a lot. When I wrote the first edition of this book, I think people were beginning to, the audacious hospitality thing is a great example here. The Reform movement started outreach, and that was a fact on the ground when the first edition was written, but there's been an embrace of bringing people in. Whoever's interested, please enter the doorway. So that book reflects that, and I found new materials, I found new ritual materials. I also, because Mikveh is, you're going to hear about Mikveh, because Mikveh is part of conversion, in the first edition of the book, I was very ginger about describing it because for liberal Jews, and my books are written for liberal Jews, which include all the way to modern Orthodox or open Orthodox, your experience of Mikveh might not be so great. And so I felt like I had to explain and warn people about that experience. In the updated edition of Choosing a Jewish Life, I could describe what a mikveh should look like, could look like, and in fact does look like, and how it should be welcoming and audaciously hospitable to everybody who enters the doorway. So the facts on the ground changed to some extent there, so I could describe them that way. I'm not a rabbi, and I don't play one on TV. These books are sort of journalistic service feature books. They're books that report on what people are doing and how they're approaching things, and also includes materials from our past. So it does situate you and your partner, your bashert, in the context of this longer tradition.
So how did you get interested in Jewish life cycles to begin with? What drew you to writing about life cycle moments?
Well, the wedding. Because there was no book there. And the reason that started was I married somebody who, when I met him, wasn't Jewish. So his introduction to Judaism class, in a lot of ways, was my introduction to Judaism class. It's a very typical story. This happens a lot. And we affiliated as adults together in a congregation before we had a child. And it was remedial education for me. I didn't really have a Jewish education. My family joined a congregation when my brother was 12 and a half, and I was 14, right? So, and it was for the grandparents. It was a bar mitzvah for the grandparents. But I did join NIFTY, which was very powerful and really positive, and very much my own Jewish experience. But I wasn't practicing, and I knew nothing, next to nothing. So when Jim started studying, I started studying, and then this book project, yes, there is room for that, and there's a need for that. Not just me, but my friends and people that I knew around the country. So that was why. And then I had a baby, and there were really no books, nothing. I had a daughter, and there was nothing written or collected about how you celebrate the entrance of a daughter into a covenant. And the material on boys, my friends were having boys, they weren't particularly helpful either, and they weren't honest about dealing with the anxiety and fear involved in circumcising a baby. So that book, there was another hole in the bookshelf. So, and then I said, no more Jewish books, I don't want to be typecast. And then then I knew how to do it, so I kept doing it. And they followed more or less the trajectory of my life. I wrote saying Kaddish the year after my father passed away, so I wrote it with a mourner's mindset.
So our audience today, both in the room and joining us by live stream, are largely congregational leaders. The topic of our day is about embracing change. So how can congregational leaders who are looking to embrace change and support people who are going through life cycle moments, which is a big moment of change, how can congregational leaders be involved with and help support Jewish weddings and other life cycle traditions?
Well, I like the word embrace. I think that, and again, the hospitality thing and audaciousness thing is to not be afraid of change. I think that when you're afraid of change, fear is a very bad place to start any kind of, anything actually, because you're defensive and afraid. So if you really have an open heart to the people who are walking through your doors, the people who are coming to you because they need a life cycle, or they're looking for meaningful life cycle events, which is often a point of contact. And this is kind of loosey-goosey, but there's an attitude. So if you're worried about it and you're putting fences around things, that's not going to work. I think the changes that are happening in the Jewish community there are profound changes, so a lot of people are afraid, but they're healthy, and I have every confidence that we're not going anywhere. People have been predicting the demise of American Judaism since we got here. And Jonathan Sarna, who's a historian of American Judaism, will talk very eloquently and funnily about this. We are not going anywhere, and I think that I have enormous confidence in the next generation to figure out the next step.
It's a lot of pressure for the generation, but I sure hope so.
No. I mean, when I was, in my 20s, we were rejecting congregational life all over the place and found ways to enter it in ways that were meaningful for us. So I'm sure that whatever congregations are going to look like, or if they're small, the Jewish community changes. Organizations come and go. Synagogues grow, they wither, they join together, they break apart. It's kind of organic that way, and so I have faith in it.
So as congregations are going through sometimes enormous change, can life cycle events be a way to draw people into their communities?
Well, I suppose so. I think I think of weddings and of babies. The birth of a baby are key, and also when there's bar mitzvahs and funerals. Those are these moments where you look for connection and also a roadmap through an important part of your life. And I think it's all word of mouth. So that if you're looking for somebody to do your wedding and you're not connected in a particular city, you're going to ask your friends, and your friends are going to be the people who say, I really liked her. Mm-hmm. You should really talk to this rabbi. And if you don't like her, you should try him. And don't try that one because he's just not friendly. And it's all chemistry. And there's no science to this. If you like the person, you sit down. One of the wonderful young rabbis I talked to here said, if you meet the rabbi and you don't want to have coffee with the rabbi again, that's not who should do your wedding. It has less to do with knowledge and learning and affiliation than it does with a personal connection. It's all about personal connection. So, putting yourself out there and opening the doors and using your younger members as ambassadors, or just not using them, but making sure their experience is good. Really making sure their experience is good, because that's how it happens. It's very loosey. I don't have prescriptions for this. I don't think anybody does.
I want to focus on some more specific elements of a Jewish wedding. In your book, you explain that there are only 3 requirements to a Jewish wedding. I'm going to paraphrase your writing here a little bit. You say there's a ring given from the husband to the wife, a vow, and 2 witnesses. That everything else that we commonly associate with Jewish weddings, including the chuppah, being married by a rabbi, the wedding blessings, even breaking the glass, it's minhag, it's custom, it's not required. So if it's not required, why is it important? Why do they matter?
Actually, the customs are in many ways more important. They're the clothing, they're the dressing, they're what gives it flavor and melody and emotional resonance. The rabbis wanted to make it very simple for people to get married. We're a very pro-marriage tradition. So it was easy. You didn't have to spend a lot of money. You didn't have to have special clothes. You didn't have to put up a chuppah. You had to have 2 witnesses to make sure that it was done consensually. And the ring is about actually appropriation and kinyan, but it's a token. It's a physical token, and the harayat, which is the vow, which is only required of the groom to the bride, is a statement of commitment. So that's the core of it. But the chuppah and the music and the dancing and the singing is what makes a wedding a wedding. So I just think it's important when I said that, it's that you shouldn't feel like you have to do everything, because it's not really a Jewish wedding if you don't do everything the way that you think it has to be done or the way that you saw it done in another wedding. But you have actually a lot of freedom to be creative and to make sure that it looks like you and it feels like you, as well as having a genuine connection to the past and to our tradition.
So do you have some suggestions on ways that couples who are getting married can adapt these traditions to make them both personally meaningful and to make them feel like them?
Well, you buy the book and it's everything I know is in there. But there's, again, because it's very simple, if you read, there are lots of translations of the wedding blessings, for example. There are many, many ways of doing them. And they've changed, actually, in these 3 editions. I've found new ones, better ones, more beautifully written ones, more creative. And there's a really lovely example in here, and I didn't write this, as another couple working with a rabbi who was a friend of mine. And she suggested that friends write something, that she would do the blessings in Hebrew, but then friends would read something connected, not a literal translation, with all kinds of rules about how long it is, because rituals should be short. And the examples that this couple used are just beautiful, and they're from all over the place. They're from Jewish tradition, Maya Angelou, Jane Hirschfield. They're all kinds of poets, living and dead, but they spoke to the couple and speak to their interest. If you're a scientist, you quote Einstein. If you're an artist, you quote an artist, and that's a way of personalizing. It's also a way of involving family members who may not read Hebrew, may not speak Hebrew, or may not be Jewish, who you want as part of your ceremony. So that's just one little way. Everything, I mean, especially with people from very different traditions becoming married, being married in a Jewish way. And I really dislike the language of intermarriage and interfaith. I think people are marrying in lots of ways. And if your bashert is from India, then using the grandmother's sari as your chuppah is a beautiful way of acknowledging that. If your intended has a Scottish background, then using a tartan, and not only for the chuppah, but maybe for the table decorations, using food from different traditions, all of that are ways that acknowledge difference, but also embrace it and make it Jewish. It becomes part of a Jewish wedding.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to share a quote from the book. You write, quote, "A Jewish wedding is all about you, but it is also about family and community and tradition. A Jewish wedding connects every couple under every chuppah to a language of holiness, to a living history, and to a diverse and vital culture. A Jewish wedding places you at the center of a never-ending story, something much larger and more mysterious than 2 people," unquote. So as Reformed Jews, or as Jews, period, how can we have a wedding that is both modern and relevant, but also connected to our past?
We've always done that. I mean, the wedding, your grandmother's wedding, your great-grandmother's wedding reflected the times they lived in, the clothing people wore, the fashion in terms of what was served at a wedding, the music that's played. All of that reflects whatever the here and now is. Actually, the first part of that is, what's the first phrase in that? Thanks. A Jewish wedding is all about you. This actually is a rebuttal to the idea that a wedding is all about you. And this is from Rabbi Noah Kushner, who's Larry's daughter, who's a wonderful rabbi also, who was talking to me about the idea that the wedding industry sells this idea that it's your day, it's all about you. And it is in a way, of course, but if you want a Jewish wedding, it is not all about you. It really isn't all about you. It's you in context. And so she said it's her challenge as a rabbi to be working against this larger culture, which really is about selling you stuff, and that it's all about you and the tastes and what you buy. And while it's important that you should feel wonderful in the clothes you wear at your wedding, this notion of becoming part of something larger, of becoming part of a couple, of creating a new household, of connecting your families, and then connecting to Jewish tradition, is what a rabbi brings to the table. Actually, one of the things, a couple of the rabbis I spoke to said, you really have to explain to people why you need a rabbi. when I wrote the first edition, it was how to shop for a rabbi, and this book also includes how to shop for a rabbi. But it wasn't like, why do you need a rabbi? Because now you can have your best friend, a Universalist life minister, and if they speak Hebrew, they can just do the whole. They could certainly lead what looks like a really intense, wonderful, beautiful Jewish wedding. But rabbis have expertise in framing it, in holding the space, in helping you talk things through in a meaningful way. They are trained, and if you find the right match, it adds enormously to the power of the ceremony. But I didn't feel I had to say that before, because so many different people now can and do ask relatives and friends to be the Meseder Kedushin, the one who sanctifies the wedding. So that is another way of saying it's all about you. But you know what? If you ask for help from your tradition, you're going to get more than you bargained for. Much more.
So Jewish weddings discourage Bridezillas, is what I understand.
I don't know. I think you could be, if you get obsessed about all the details, I think you can be pretty horrible too. I mean, I don't think so. But I think that also, I think working with clergy is one way of keeping your feet on the ground a little bit and talking about the ceremony. I think a lot of the etiquette books that I read when I was looking for a book were all about that. They were all about all those details, very little, almost nothing about the ceremony. And to spend time thinking about the ceremony. The ketubah, for example, which has now become normative for Jewish weddings. Whether you're affiliated, whether you're barely Jewish, you still get a ketubah. And that wasn't true in 1985. It was still kind of bubbling up. And this is before internet, so I gave the lists of where you could find a ketubah artist, and I wrote something like, in the Midwest, you may not find anybody. But, not anymore. ketubah.com. And the choices are endless. But just the idea of picking a ketubah, talking about the language that's in there, talking about the art, what's that going to look like in your home? I mean, it becomes a very meaningful conversation. So embellishing the tradition is important to us too. Hidur mitzvah is important. And so obsessing about some of those details, in addition to the flowers and the music and the dresses and all that, helps balance it, I think.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier that every wedding is a blending of Jewish traditions, no matter what background you come from. So what advice do you have for couples that are navigating family differences, who are bringing together two sets or more of
often more than traditions. It's tricky. You are making a family out of people who are strangers to each other. And I have friends whose daughters and sons are marrying non-Jews or people who've converted, but all of a sudden they have machatunim who aren't Jewish, or their son-in-law is going to have, their son is going to have non-Jewish in-laws, and they never thought about that before. So I think it's important to be honest and to try to have open conversations and listen carefully and not be defensive. It's not easy. And again, if you have a good rabbi or cantor or clergy to work with you who's been through this before, I don't think there's a universal answer to this, but I think if you're sitting with somebody who knows you and knows a little bit about both your families, maybe they can help you craft a conversation, craft a meeting where you share baby pictures and everybody goes ooh on, and you've got somewhere to start from. So, but again, I think that the wisdom of tradition and the wisdom that hopefully that clergy learn over the years and also in school can be a help there too.
And what about I just started premarital counseling with my fiance and our rabbi, and she has been an incredible source of wisdom for us already. But for parents and immediate family who don't have that opportunity to be regularly meeting with clergy before the wedding, what advice do you have for them?
Well, again, I think that it's something to talk to a clergy person about and how to do that. I mean, I think you have to be respectful of your parents. I think that your parents have been waiting for you to get married a lot longer than you have. And they had certain ideas about what it was going to look like and what it was going to be and where it was going to be. And this is a change. But of course, we now live in a world where people are a little more prepared for that their friends also, that their cohort has been through this before. So it's not brand new, but it still could be a physical shock. So I think you have to listen. I think you have to ask them to be open-hearted. You can't fix maybe you can't fix it for everybody in your family. There may be people who just simply are not going to accept the fact that you're not marrying somebody Jewish, or that you're marrying an Orthodox Jew. You know, you have a lot of resistance to that too. So every family is different. You tiptoe around it. You try to be open-hearted and try to be respectful and ask them to listen to you too. You can also, if you don't care about the flowers, give it to somebody who cares about the flowers and give them something to do. Give them part of the process to make their own, so that they're giving you a gift. So if that's not at the heart of what you want to do, if the ceremony is what matters to you, don't ask for help from the family. And if the flowers do matter for you, don't ask somebody else to do it. But you can involve people and ask people for help and give them meaningful tasks at the ceremony, at the table afterwards, the night before. There are ways to braid your families together at the dinner beforehand, at the brunch. There are lots of ways to do that, with singing, with baby pictures, with storytelling, jokes.
So my best friend, my maid of honor at my wedding, is Catholic, is not very familiar with Jewish wedding traditions, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who has members of a wedding party or even guests who might be unfamiliar with Jewish wedding traditions. Of course, they should go buy your book, but what else? What are other things that we can do to help make our guests feel more included in a wedding that might be unfamiliar to them?
Well, again, the first edition of this book, there was this whole thing about pamphlets and wedding booklets that you would give people, and when they would come in and they would read about it. The problem with that is you don't want people reading during a wedding. You want them looking at you, and you want their faces turned to you. But now that we have these wonderful wedding websites of your own, you can inform people in advance and say, if this is your first Jewish wedding, and do it with a light touch, please read the following, so you'll get a sense of what's going to happen. And people are generally, in my experience, are really interested and really enthusiastic to learn this and participate as much as they possibly can. So the wedding website now, instead of an envelope stuffed full of things with where to stay and what time dinner is and what time all that is, it's all on the website. So it's kind of clean and neat. And if you want to have a printout at the wedding or the dinner the night before, perhaps, that you can use the website that way. But people use it, and I've heard that it works quite well.
So this has come up already a number of times, but there is a growing diversity in Judaism today. We're seeing an increase in LGBTQ, interfaith, interracial couples. You mentioned in the book that the choices of wedding traditions are the same for everybody, but if they want to, what are some ways couples can incorporate their identity into their wedding in a meaningful way?
Well, I think we've talked about it a little bit with cultural traditions. There's food, there's clothing, there's music, there's storytelling, there's poetry that could be used in the ceremony. And I think acknowledging that difference is a way of really knitting families together, and it's a sign of respect, tremendous respect. In weddings where gender is different than it's not just boy girl, there's new language, and rabbis who've done this before in particular have a lot of really wonderful language they use. There's some suggestions in this book too. But again, they're all the same. I think we've moved away, especially with marriage equality, the idea that there's a gay wedding and then there's a straight wedding and there's an interfaith wedding. No, it's all one chuppah to me. Anyway, this is certainly my platform. Is that if you want to have a Jewish wedding, you can have a Jewish wedding, and but making those choices together is part of the process of working out what your ethnic and religious identity is going to be as a couple, regardless if you're from the same background or from different backgrounds.
So can you tell me, between 1985, when you first published the book, and now, what are some of the most positive or inspiring changes that you've observed in the Jewish community as you've gathered your research and materials for the book? And why should others here and in congregations across North America be inspired by those changes?
Well, I think we talked about them earlier. The diversity, I think, is a great thing. Mm-hmm. It's good for us every possible way. It's good for us genetically, culinarily, musically, in every possible way. We wouldn't be here, actually. There would be no Jewish world, no Jewish community without people joining our tribe. So that's part of our history as well that people don't like to acknowledge. So there's that, and it makes for more beautiful wedding and more interesting weddings. And I think people who join in one way or another bring new perspectives and new questions and a lack of baggage that from childhood rabbis they didn't like. They don't bring any of that. They tend to be wide-eyed and open, and I think that being among beginners and new learners is good for everybody. It makes you look at what you have with new eyes.
So when we first asked you to be a part of this day, you requested to be interviewed by a millennial going through a Jewish life cycle moment. They scoured the sidewalks.
Yes, and they came up with you.
Came up with me.
It was just sort of a wish list. It's like, please, not a rabbi who's my age. That was sort of the, it was like, no, I really, this is also something I think it's really important for community leaders to be learning from younger people, that you have interesting ways of looking at things, and you have lessons to teach as well. And I think we make a mistake when we try to make diverse panels, for example, with gender differences and sexual identity differences. But I think age is also a really important way to diversify, which needs to have. So that's why.
There is a lot of talk in congregations these days about millennial engagement. It came up earlier in our conversation here in the room. How can Jewish life cycle moments connect millennials to Jewish life?
There's nothing like a good wedding. There's really nothing like it's. Our tradition is so good at this stuff. At weddings, at coming of age, at death, our tradition provides language and ritual structures, and not just the wedding, but the whole lead up to the wedding. The whole notion that a couple is bride and groom, king and queen for a year. That we are part of this larger thing, and then that once you step into it, if it's really presented to you as something that is not just enforced upon you, but that is yours to work, to create, to be a co-creator with a very ancient tradition, I think that's an exciting possibility, an opportunity. And maybe it's the way we talk about this as this is really cool thing you can do. We're going to make together. And it's going to look like you, and it's going to feel like you, and your family and friends are going to come and know this wedding was for you. I think that's exciting, and it's part of the riches of Jewish tradition.
Mm-hmm. How are some ways that congregational leaders can be inspired by the changes that you've seen that have caused you to update the books? What do you think could be most inspiring for congregational leaders in our current Jewish landscape?
Well, maybe just listening to people who are younger, and let's stop using labels like millennial. My daughter's 32 next week. Is she millennial? She's a little too old for that, right? I think so. I think she's Gen X. I mean, so who cares? But she's a very powerful presence, and you are. And I think listening to younger people and not saying, they're a problem, and how do we solve them, and how do we, what breadcrumbs can we pass, but is it avocado toast? Will that get them into the temple? Which is pandering and obnoxious. But listening to you, asking for you to be on panels and talk to people and speak it from the bima, and obviously they're already looking at people who are connected some way. But you invite your friends. So I'm doing this talk, and you get some people off the street and come listen to me, whether they're Jewish or not, especially if they're not. And I think that's one little way to get going. I think we tend to be talking to ourselves, and that's not a good thing, not healthy.
There's the Audacious Hospitality team at the URJ has a great phrase they love to use, not about us without us.
Right.
I think that's quite succinctly describes what I've experienced my generation to be looking for.
Right, exactly.
So I'd like to ask you one more question, and then we'll take some Q&A that have been coming in online. For those of you who are watching the live stream from your home, from a synagogue, and you'd like to send us a question and you haven't yet, you can email it to us at leadershipinstitute@urj.org. We mentioned earlier the original title of the book when it was published in 1985 was the new Jewish wedding, and in the most recent version, you renamed it The Jewish Wedding Now. And in the foreword of the book, you discuss why you made that change, and you ask the question, can the new Jewish wedding still be new? So can you answer your own question? Can Jewish weddings still be new?
Well, I think I answered in the next sentence, actually, but that yes, every wedding is the first wedding in the world. I mean, that's, and also the penultimate wedding in the world. So every wedding hasn't happened. No, it has never happened before, so it is new, and it's certainly new for you. Even if it's a second wedding, it's this person, this moment, this love, and that's what you're celebrating. So there is nobody else like you. There's no other couple like you. So every wedding is, in fact, unique and new. But after 30 years, it needed a new title. It just felt a little, can it still be the new Jewish wedding as a book? So it was more the title. But I do believe it's still new every single time.
You have a great story in the book about the first wedding between Adam and Eve. Do you want to share that story?
Oh, this is Midrash. It's that at the first wedding in the world, God braided Eve's hair and stood up with Adam, and the angels were there. And so from the very beginning, this notion of holiness is part of the Jewish imagination. Now, this is real fantasy. This is old Jewish fantasy about the importance of a wedding and God's presence at a wedding and the angel's presence at a wedding and being completely surrounded by that. There's a tradition that other couples should go stand under the chuppah after the wedding because there's sort of a direct line under a chuppah because God cares a lot about these things, so that you have a straight line to heaven if you stand under the chuppah. It's nice. It's a nice story. I like that story.
Anita, thank you so
You're
much.
welcome. So
We're
we
going
got
to take
questions.
some questions now. Daryl Messinger, the chair of the...
I know who that is.
The chair of the North American Board of the URJ, asks, how does the trend to have a friend officiate reflect a broader change in our community?
Well, yeah, it's this notion that anybody can do it. It's just a matter of reading words. But in fact, that's just not true. I attended a wedding not long ago, a family member, and she had a friend who was an attorney and was used to public speaking, and she got so rattled because this was such an intense, heavy thing to do. Nobody could hear her. And it didn't matter to the people who were being married. They were standing right in front of her. But it stopped being a communal thing. So there's an artistry, there's the dramaturgy of a wedding. So people do it, and some people are terrific as friends and family members being the leader of the wedding, but there are limits to it. So, but it's very common. If you read the New York Times wedding pages, there's a lot of that, and I don't think you stop it by pulling your hair out, but again, it's word of mouth. If you were at a great wedding and you know what it could be like, sometimes there's a lot of politics to who's the rabbi. You know, is it your rabbi? Is it my rabbi? Oh, forget it. We'll just have cousin Rachel do it. That sort of solves the problem. But you do miss something. I do believe that.
Brian Hollander from Congregation Berith Shalom in Troy, New York asks, is there a book that you haven't written yet that you really want to write? What would it be?
No. If I could figure out how to write the Jewish afterlife, I would do that. It's my standard joke. No, no. The raising a Jewish child and living a Jewish life have chapters about bar and bat mitzvah and about choosing schools, and so that sort of material is covered in there.
Lauren Schlesinger from Peninsula Temple Shalom in Burlingame, California asks, how do you discuss the role of synagogue community in your books?
Well, not so much in the wedding book, actually. In living a Jewish life and choosing a Jewish life in particular, and also in the how to raise a Jewish child, the role of community and the role of congregation is discussed. And what are you looking for? What works for you? How to shop for a congregation? How to shop for a rabbi? I know that sounds awful, but it's important. It's like, you don't necessarily just take the first doctor on a list of doctors. You talk to friends, you have a conversation. If someone's going to do surgery, you get a second opinion. And this is a big decision too. You want to know that this congregation is right for your family. Is it welcoming indeed? If you are an interracial family and you have interracial kids, or you've adopted, is your child going to be the only one who's not white? What does that feel like? So it's important to do due diligence and ask questions. And in some of these books, there are questions that are, ask this, look for that. Have a conversation with a rabbi, not on the high holidays. Not on the high holidays. Don't go to the high holidays if you're shopping. Go on a Shabbat, or a Shabbat for children if you're looking for a place for kids. So that is addressed in some of these books more than others.
The question is if you could talk about how millennials and other younger generations appreciate change and how this has affected congregational affiliation.
Can you address that? This is one of those questions. I am not an expert on this. I'm not an expert on anything, actually. I consider this journalism to some extent, although I have opinions. But I try to back them up, and I try to give a range of options. But you have to answer that.
Oh, boy.
You don't have to. You can go to the next question. You're in charge.
I think that, well, I'll start by saying this. My generation is the most diverse in Jewish history. We have more Jews of color, more LGBTQ Jews, more Jews coming from interfaith parenting and becoming part of an interfaith relationship than ever before. And so I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all approach to millennials. But that said, I think congregations often get stuck, you mentioned this earlier a little bit, that they get stuck in a this is how we've always done it mentality. And so millennials who are coming in and saying, oh, but what about this, and what about that, and we can change this, and let's try this, and I saw this on a reality show on TV, I think can be very overwhelming to congregations and who might not know how to handle that and then leads to millennials feeling disconnected and not heard.
Right. And services are not for everybody.
Right.
I think in my experience of younger people, the social justice and really being involved in communal action on a whole host of issues, from environment to racial justice to income inequality, all of which are Jewish subjects. There has to be room in the synagogue for that. The more that's a home for them, that's meaningful, that is also run by a diverse group of people in terms of age as well as backgrounds. I think that has to also be part of the equation. I think.
Stephen Portnoy in New York City asks, what did you learn about the Jewish way of mourning that you didn't know?
I don't think you know any of it until you go through it, actually. I didn't know how important Shiva was or how exhausting it is. I remember every face and every card that I got. It was meaningful in ways that I had no idea of. Also, just the timing of it, the fact that you have a week and you have a month and you have month to month, you have a year, you have every year, you have Yisker services. And when I wrote that book, I was on panels with people from different religious traditions, and at Mount Ida College here, which prepares people for the funeral business for them. And everybody envies the Jews. The Catholic priests and the language and the psycho-spiritual path that you walk is so wise and so profound. But the thing is, you have to have a community or it's awful. You can't sit Shiva alone. That's kind of the worst thing you could do. And you need a community to do that, which is why congregations still are very important. And Havarot as well. We have 15 minutes. There's a sign.
Have you considered writing a book about Jewish divorce and the life after divorce?
Nope.
Okay.
No. I'm not sure what Jewish divorce is like. Divorce is divorce. There's actually a very wise set of rituals, actually very incredibly sexist in tradition, but that have been reinvented by liberal Jews in the last couple generations to, again, give it a kind of ritual weight. So for example, sometimes people after going through divorce will come to the mikveh and reenact a change. This is another change of status. So you can use Jewish traditions, but they're around rituals. It's really not about divorce. I think that's a lawyer's book, right?
So we're talking a lot about making changes to life cycle events, but how can we help those who are traditionalists, who like the how it's always done, and how can we help them embrace the changes that people want in events?
I don't know who you're talking about. I mean, you're talking about rabbis who want to do it the way it was, or parents who want their children to do it the way it was. But I think that, I hope that these books provide a real connection to the traditions and to traditional ways. None of it goes back to Sinai. It's all minhag that's come down. So the way the tradition is 50 years old or 100 years old. It's not from the beginning of time. It's changed. But if it's really important that it be this melody, maybe that's it. But it's still a harayat. It's still a ring. It's still a chuppah. It can be traditional music down for the processional. There's all kinds of ways that it will feel and sound authentic. I really don't like using that category because I think a wedding that doesn't look like weddings in the past is just as Jewishly authentic.
Mm-hmm. Seth Cohen from Temple Beth Am in Seattle asks, can you tell us how your congregation, it's a personal question, has helped you get through life cycle events, both good and bad?
Yeah. I've gone through all of them in my congregation. My husband converted and did his first drash there, and when we had a baby naming there, and when she started kindergarten, there was a kind of convocation, and she got a little tiny Torah, and we went to religious school, bat mitzvah. Did I mention we got married there too? And then in the aftermath of the death of parents, the congregation showed up in a big way. And I've been to funerals of people who I've known there too, so it's been very much a part of my life. And I didn't grow up in a synagogue. I didn't grow up with that. And so I find it's been very important for me personally and in my family. And I made sure that it was part of my daughter's life. And so it's sort of built into her expectation of she's not a congregation member, she's 32, and she's not looking for something and not finding it. But I have every confidence that she's connected. So.
You're getting a lot of requests for new books. Ellen Bernstein at Congregation Sha'arei Shalom wants to know if you'll be writing a book on connecting Judaism to your grandchildren.
No. I get that one a lot, how to be a Jewish grandparent. I think it's pretty simple. You love them a lot, and you say yes as much as possible, and you do your own Jewish stuff, and you invite them to it. I think that's Jewish grandparenting. I do. I think that's it. I don't know how much more you need to know than that. If you're living a joyful, authentic, delicious Jewish life, and you invite your grandchildren to have fun with you, that's how you do it. And their memories of you and will be braided together with memories of beautiful Shabbats and holidays and just time together.
So the conservative...
Oh, summer camp too. If you can pay for summer camp, that's good. Summer camp is the answer to everything, I think.
The conservative movement recently reaffirmed its decision to bar conservative rabbis from performing interfaith weddings, and there's even a question on the table now if they should be allowed to attend interfaith weddings. There are Reform rabbis who still won't perform interfaith weddings. So Libby Libschultz from B'nai Shalom in Albany, New York, asked that you mentioned when you were researching updates for your book, you talked to rabbis under 40. Do you find that most, all of them, some of them are willing to perform interfaith weddings?
Yeah, and I talked to, it was probably self-selected to some extent, but yes, I think it's generational, I really do. And I have friends, peers, my age, a little older, who were adamantly, I'm never going to, and these are Reform rabbis, I'll never do that, and they do now. And the world changed, Also, interfaith is a kind of it's a loaded term. There are lots of people who are marrying in where there's not another faith in the room, where they didn't grow up with another faith, or their parents' faith is not part of their lives anymore. And my favorite stories, I went to a wedding where the groom's name was Sean Kennedy, and he didn't convert. He was wearing a kittel. Do you know what a kittel is? He was wearing a white robe that Orthodox, more traditional Jews wear at their wedding, at Seder, and when they're buried, and a kippah, and it was a rabbi, and someone afterwards made some comment. It was a lovely interfaith wedding, and he said it was a Jewish wedding. And it was a Jewish wedding. And when his first son was born, he put the kittel on again, and he held him for his circumcision. So I don't know what you call that, but it's not an interfaith wedding or marriage. So there are a lot of rabbis who are very comfortable. They all make their own decisions, but with that kind of a wedding, they see that as perfectly legitimate and a way of welcoming people in. And there are rabbis who don't want to co-officiate. Other rabbis are fine with co-officiating. You have to find the rabbi that's right for you.
Gwen from Temple Har Zion in Toronto, Ontario, wrote us a novel. How can we address Jewish information, learning, and conversion so that it will be more accessible for mobile, tech-savvy adults who are motivated to consider the choice? Can we examine online learning for a portion of the Jewish learning experience? Becoming Jewish and belonging to the Jewish people is a lifetime experience, not simply completion of a course that many complete to achieve marriage and to get into a Jewish family.
There's a lot online, actually. The conversion, that was one of the big changes in the conversion book. There are and there's a big range. There are people who are very serious. There are rabbis who are running very serious education programs, and then there are kind of conversion mills that really kind of don't smell right. But people, I remember many years ago getting a very anguished letter from somebody from, I think, Scotland, north of Scotland, and he couldn't find anybody to study with. And, what could I say? Maybe you send letters, but now it's not a problem anymore. You really can do distance learning. People are getting advanced degrees with distance learning. So absolutely that's true. And of course, all of these books and most books are available digitally. So the library is wide open. So I actually think that is happening. And so, but let me just say that the congregations in terms of hospitality have still a little way to go about honoring people who've made the choice to convert to Judaism, and that it's a lot of our people now. And I was talking to somebody the other day who didn't like to call people up to the Torah of Abraham and Sarah to name their parents as that. And I said, but that's a point of pride, isn't it? To name those people as your parents, the founders of the Jewish tradition. And she said, I never thought of it that way. But I think we have to start thinking about it that way, that people make this remarkable decision to cast their lot in with us in a world which is increasingly dangerous to be Jewish in. And I think that's a real gift that we should be thanking people for, whether they go to the mikveh or not. If they are there and showing up and driving their kids to religious school and paying dues and supporting Jewish organizations, if it looks like a Jew and it quacks like a Jew.
What is the biggest change you've encountered in Judaism over the last 15 years?
I think the full participation of women is the most profound, actually. And I think it's like oxygen now. Nobody notices so much anymore. But somebody mentioned that at their wedding they had to make sure there was no male God language in the service. But women are learned and learning and teaching and writing theology and running things more and more, needs to be more. So I think that's a huge sea change that, especially in the liberal Jewish world, feels like, we already did that. But I lived through it. A lot of people in this room lived through it, and I think that it's like an earthquake that is still rumbling, and it will for a long time. And yet it's an example of how change it empowered half of the Jewish community that didn't have a voice before. What a great thing that is. So,
Jeremy Wolf, sitting in the room here with us, asked, do you think that the Mikveh movement that you spearheaded here in Massachusetts is spreading around North America? Why or why not?
Yeah, it is, actually. Mayim Chaim's been open 14 years now, And we have consulted and spoken to people, and we've had national conferences, international conferences. And in fact, there are a couple that are operating in Atlanta, in North Carolina, that are very much built on the model of Mayim Chaim. In Israel, our materials are being used also, and around the world. So yeah, it's and when we first started it, we were very keen to consult and get it going everywhere. But I actually think it needed to take some time to sink in and to become more normal. Mikveh was kind of really weird for the liberal community when we were talking about it at the beginning. It's like, why? Because we reinvented it, because we embraced it. We went back to the source of it, which is the power of water as transformational, which is a universal fact in all religious traditions. So if you go back to the source, to the Mayim, then it makes a lot of sense. And it's now part of Jewish life for people whose parents and grandmothers would have completely not permitted you to, in fact, don't ever go to a mikveh. And that's changed. That is changing. And it's been embraced by people of all different ages. It is, in Boston, I think it's relatively normative for brides and grooms to use the mikveh because it's beautiful and welcoming, and you can do it your own way, and we can give you all the material, but you choose how to make it meaningful and beautiful for you. You can bring people with you, you can come alone. I mean, you can have a witness, you don't have to have a witness. And all of this is halachic, by the way, and kosher, and also all yours.
We'd like to thank everyone who sent in questions. If we did not get to your question, please join us at Biennial here in Boston in December. Anita will be a featured speaker at our Shabbat lunch. Do you have a quick preview of what you'll be talking about there?
Well, you've heard a lot of it here. There's a little bit more about sources and where sort of the process of writing it and the sort of the key points in it. So it's a little more organized.
Well, thank you again so much for
welcome.
being
Thank
out
you.
here today.
Thank
We
you,
really
Mariah.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.